Have you ever been in a social interaction with someone that just doesn't really move their face? As you talk, they just stare at you without much movement or reactivity. Well, in this edition of Behavior Dissected, we're going to dive deep into the behavior and give you a process for how to better understand and interact with people who have low facial feedback, because I can almost guarantee you are making mistakes when it comes to the perception and the meaning you attach to a stoic or deadpan face. Also, if we haven't met, my name is Blake Eastman, the founder of the Nonverbal Group, a behavioral research and education company that is focused on increasing behavioral awareness and teaching higher level communication and social skills. Let me demonstrate an example of various degrees of facial feedback so we are on the same page. Let's say you were in a group of 3 to 5 people and you were telling a story. You reach the part of your story where usually you get positive reactions within like a 10-second window. These are examples of degrees of facial feedback. The first two are completely deadpan. We have no facial reaction at all. The only difference is the blink rate. The version of me on the right is blinking more, and at a subtle level, people will probably be more comfortable with a blinking deadpan face than a non-blinking deadpan face. We then see variations of facial feedback. In the third video, there's a slight smirk with a slight head nod. In the fourth video, that combination is intensified. On the fifth, there is a laugh, smile, and much bigger reaction. And finally, in the sixth video, there is probably what some people might perceive as an overreaction. Now, these are obviously all fake displays as I am acting them out. When I talk about someone with a stoic face, I am referring to someone who has a very low level of facial feedback, and it mostly looks like examples 1 and 2 the majority of the time they are in a social dynamic. Also, this video would be way too long if I went into this, but there are also several other properties that heavily influence how people perceive you, which involve things like facial structure. For example, I can be stoic and non-reactive, but I can slightly change my facial display, and the general perception of my mood and character will greatly change. People are going to have different perceptions of who I am as a person just by changing a very subtle aspect of my facial structure, even though it's still relatively stoic. If you want to learn more about this, check out the book Face Value by Alexander Todorov. It's a really good and accessible overview of all the academic research done on first impressions. Okay, so now that we have an idea of the behavior I am talking about, I want you to understand that facial animation is an incredibly deep and robust aspect of communication and behavior. Communication experts tend to make this very simple, and it's not. The frequency, intensity, and a ton of other factors lead to the meaning we create when we look at someone's face. And for this video, I want you to really understand 2 important elements of the stoic face. First, we read human faces as a mechanism for feedback, and we are socialized to pay attention to the face for the non-stop cues it displays. Without that reactivity in the face, it's often difficult to navigate social interactions, and most people will find it extremely uncomfortable to talk to someone with a complete flat affect, especially when the feedback is really desired. If you are at work and you're presenting something to me and the entire time I'm just staring at you without any reaction, it's going to be hard to know where you're at and what kind of information. You don't have the ability to get any information from me, essentially. Second, there is a very, very important cultural element when it comes to facial animation and overall perception. If someone has a low level of facial animation and they work in the New York City tech industry, they're probably going to have more problems than if they work in Shanghai in the financial sector. The cultural element is absolutely critical because different levels of facial animation are perceived differently. For example, in certain cultures, too much facial animation can be perceived as phony or fake. All behavior exists within a container of culture and norms. You need to always understand the culture before you really get how that behavior is perceived within it. Okay, so now that you get the larger context and understand the elements that go into a stoic face, I want to give you some key insights on how to more effectively work and interact with people that have a stoic face. Also, to do this, remember we are using one of the key frameworks of the Nonverbal Group, behavior, context, why. We are taking a look at a behavior, understanding the surrounding contextual elements of that behavior, and then coming up with a reason on why it's occurring. But before we do this, I want to give you a warning about reading people with low-level facial displays, which is a non-responsive face tends to bring out our own insecurities. If you have an average level of behavioral awareness and you are talking to someone and not getting that facial feedback, most people turn inward and start to make something about themselves the problem. Meaning because you aren't getting validation, you think something is wrong with what you are saying or how you are acting. which makes how you actually process and make meaning out of the behavior obviously very biased. This is probably the biggest multi-layer attribution error people make when reading faces. Because we aren't getting facial feedback, we tend to invent reasons why. For example, you're giving a presentation and you didn't really give your all, and someone is just staring at you, and you turn that movement into they didn't like the presentation. This is one of the reasons why I like to train people in my presentation classes to be used to speaking in front of an audience with a lower level of facial animation. You aren't always going to get people nodding and smiling and shaking their head while you speak, and you don't want that lack of response to mess with you. But let me take you through the decision tree and really explain the raw reality of the Stoic face. If we have no context about a person and we observe this behavior in an interaction, there are several reasons why it could be happening. First, it could be both tactical and intentional. I have seen people in business and personal settings intentionally reduce facial animation. I've seen it in high-level financial interviews more than any other sector. In fact, one of the most effective teams I have ever experienced had a leader with a Stoic face, and she was surrounded by people who craved her approval, which she would dish out in very, very small doses, and it made everyone around her really, really hustle to the brink of death. While this can work, it requires the perfect blend of personalities and motivations, and it isn't the healthiest way to run a business. Most of the time, people just end up burning out under this type of management style, in addition to harboring a ton of resentment. But someone could be reducing facial displays to get a reaction, whatever that may be. Second, it could be their average facial display. I work with a lot of people that have social challenges because they have a Stoic face that is often a complete blind spot. I work with one client who got feedback from his team that he was cold and hard to connect with. When we met this guy, literally he did not move his face at all. No nod, squint, smirk, nothing. I recorded him and showed him what he looked like, and he was absolutely shocked that he was coming across like that. And the really interesting thing was he had a father who believed business was serious, and from a very young age, he was told that men don't smile while in the workplace. He internalized that, and it became his reality. Nicest guy in the world, just didn't move his face. I had another client who grew up in an Eastern European country where low-level facial reactivity is more of the norm. He was working in a culture where everyone was very animated and reactive, and he thought they were all crazy because of the cultural differences. Let me say this again. The majority of Stoic faces, or people that have Stoic faces, are wonderful, warm, and attentive people. Their face just doesn't show it. Third, it could be contextually reactive, and they don't know. For example, I have a friend who has a lot of social anxiety, and when he is in groups, he will lower his facial feedback considerably. He is fine when me and him are talking alone, but his reaction to specific context is to lower his facial animation. I also see this for people specifically when they are listening to presentations. I have had a lot of clients and a lot of people in my classes over the years that just stare at me. They are taking in every single word, but they are not reacting at all. No nods, laughs, they just go into a more intense level of focus, and they don't really think about reacting. At the end of the class, they would come up and tell me how much they enjoyed it, and I would be so confused because the lack of that facial feedback doesn't really align with that statement. But after seeing this so many times, you start to learn that it has nothing to do with you and is just a facet of their own facial expressions. Fourth, they could be concealing emotionality. Someone can be frustrated, angry, annoyed, and they could be masking their emotions. However, this is usually really easy to spot as it will manifest itself in other areas of the body. Also, I conducted the largest study ever on poker players, a project called Beyond Tells that took 7 years, and I will tell you, hiding your emotions isn't the easiest thing at the poker table, and it's considerably more difficult in a social context. Fifth, they could be uninterested, bored, and just, aren't really reacting to what you are saying. Most people aren't going to do this with a fixed gaze. They are more likely to be distracted and check their phone or something like that, but it is possible. That is what makes reading behavior so damn complex and cool. It's this incredibly dynamic, active puzzle. It's not about waiting for someone to cross their arms or shift their posture in your direction. That's noticing behavior, and it's the first step, but we have a lot of context that we need to consider to come up with some ideas about what the more probable reasons why that behavior is occurring. A big reason I do these types of videos is because the average person meets someone with a Stoic face and they either go, I must not be that interesting, make themselves the problem route, or they go, they really quickly make a judgment about someone because of the lack of facial displays. A core aspect of reading behavior is being able to source the reasons someone could have that behavior and then get verification. That is step one, having the awareness. Step two is about understanding which one it actually is, and that relies on your own social abilities and aptitude. But I just want to give you some general tips on how to navigate this type of dynamic. Tip number one, don't make meaning out of the Stoic face. I said this before, but it's not a reflection of you or them yet. You need to gather more information. Like I said, most people fail at this step. We really need to put this at the forefront of how you process behavior. I really believe that in your life, you have probably had people that would have been amazing coworkers, friends, and even partners who displayed this type of face, and it shut down the ability to develop more of a relationship, or it really affected your performance. Also, there's absolutely nothing more satisfying than when you flawlessly give your presentation while someone is doing this intentionally. To do that, you can't make meaning out of that face. Tip number two, engage the person more than normal. If I'm giving a presentation or talking in a small group, I will reference that person or have them hand me something or interact in some way. If it's in a small meeting setting, I will ask that person questions like, is this clear? Does this make sense? To elicit a response. Sometimes people will immediately spike, and when they speak, they will become animated and be like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. Those people usually have a blind spot and have no idea they have low levels of facial activity. Tip number three, if they are staring at you with a low level of facial feedback for a long period of time in a presentation format, they are almost always just displaying their average facial display. At this point, I have over 15,000 hours of public speaking in various forms. It's pretty simple. If people aren't interested in what you are saying, they won't be able to look at you for longer periods of time. They will get distracted. A lot of the people who just sit there and stare just don't feel they need to give you as much facial feedback. Some people just don't feel the need to actively, reinforce that they like the presentation, but they would completely do that in a one-on-one conversation or a small group setting. Tip number four, gather some intel. If you're working at a new job, watch how that person reacts with other people, and you should quickly be able to determine if it's their default or if it's something with you. Earlier in my career, I spoke at this company, and at the end of the presentation, someone asked me how I think the talk went, which was a very bold question. And I said something like, I crushed it. Most of you loved it, except this guy. And I called it out, and everyone started laughing. And he was the CTO of the company and had a consistent negative facial expression. And it was well known in the company that his behavior shouldn't be taken so personally. Tip number five, be straight and just ask. This takes some courage, and there are different ways to do this, but sometimes I flat out just say, you don't move your face much with a smirk or something like that. And I can't tell you how many times people will say, that is so crazy, my wife or coworkers or whatever say the same exact thing. In my classes, sometimes people will ask me to read them in real time and make judgments. And for a lot of stoic face people, I say, people think you're an asshole at first, but then they say you're so nice or something like that. And they're like, how did you know that? And it's because they are stoic or slightly angry or leaning towards slightly angry for 40 minutes of the presentation, but then they really start laughing and opening up. And it's that gradual change in demeanor that sometimes being straight and just asking will speed that curve up. To summarize, a lack of facial expressions has probably nothing to do with you. Have some empathy for people who display this behavior, as they will most likely be wonderful people who just don't move their face much. Take the time to figure out the reasons why, and you'll be shocked at how quickly you can connect and thrive in environments that have people with low levels of social reactivity in their face. Okay, so this video was a lot longer than I planned, and I cut it in half from what I initially was going to do, but I really hope this opens your eyes to how you could more effectively read and interact with people with a stoic face. If it was helpful, please let me know why and how in the comments so I can make more videos like this or change my approach. Comments and feedback is really helpful when making videos because normally I'm reacting in real time to my audience. Video doesn't allow me to do that, so the comments really show me what's working and what isn't. Also, I release about 3 videos a week, and if you want to get access to them, please, in addition to other resources that will develop your behavioral awareness, sharpen your communication, and help you gain a social edge, make sure you head over to nonverbalgroup.com/newsletter and sign up for the behavioral list, which is a weekly email I send out with all the content we create, in addition to a wide range of research opportunities, workshops, and a lot more. Also, it always annoys me to say this, but please subscribe, like, comments, all that stuff really helps this channel and this platform grow. And it really helps me just personally understand what's working and what isn't working, like I said before. So thank you so much for watching. And for the bulk of my 20s, I actually had a stoic face while going out. So a little social anxiety in public settings. So like I would go to a bar and I'd be that person that just would just stare. And I had no idea. And it was so creepy. And I wish I could shake that 20, why is no one interacting with me? Like I'm looking in their direction and I'm staring at them. And also I have a very low blink rate. It's like a joke with me and my fiance. But so I'm just looking at people, staring and not blinking. It doesn't work. All right, that's about it. Post below if you have any questions.